So, this happened a few months ago while I was working the night shift at a gas station. It's not the most glamorous job, but the pay's decent, and I don't mind the quiet. Most nights, nothing happens. Just a few people stopping for gas or snacks, and then it's dead until morning. But that night was different. It started around 2 a.m. The station is in the middle of nowhere, right off a highway that doesn't see much traffic at night. The kind of place where, if you're alone, you can hear every little creak and buzz. I was sitting behind the counter, scrolling on my phone to kill time, when I saw headlights pull into the lot. I straightened up, figuring it was just another late-night driver. A beat-up old sedan rolled in and parked at the farthest pump from the store. It sat there for a while, engine idling, but no one got out. I watched for a bit, thinking maybe they were just sorting through something in their car. But after a couple of minutes, the engine cut off, and the headlights went dark. Still, no one got out. It was weird, but I tried not to overthink it. Maybe they were just resting or waiting for someone. People do that sometimes. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. Someone was standing behind the pump, barely visible in the dim light. They weren't pumping gas. They were just standing there, staring at the store. I tried to act casual, like I hadn't noticed, but I could feel their eyes on me. It's hard to explain, but there was something off about the way they stood there, completely still, like they were waiting for something. After a few minutes, I decided to wave, thinking maybe they needed help or were just nervous, but they didn't react. They didn't even move. That's when I started to feel uneasy. The longer they stood there, the more I started to second-guess myself. Should I go outside? Should I call someone? I didn't want to look paranoid, but the whole situation was setting off alarm bells in my head. Eventually, I grabbed the store phone and stepped out from behind the counter, trying to make it clear that I wasn't alone. That's when the person finally moved. They stepped out from behind the pump, and I got my first good look at them. It was a man, maybe in his 40s, wearing a hoodie that covered most of his face. "Hey, you need something?" I called out. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the side of the building, disappearing out of sight. I stood there for a second, debating whether to follow him or just lock the doors and stay inside. I decided on the latter. I went back inside, locked the doors, and kept my eyes on the security cameras. One of the cameras pointed to the side of the building, but when I checked, he wasn't there. It was like he'd just vanished. About 10 minutes passed, and I started to convince myself that he'd left. Maybe he was just passing through, and I was overreacting. But then the power flickered. Not enough to turn everything off. Just a quick flash. That was enough to send my nerves into overdrive. I went to the back room to check the circuit breakers, just in case. When I got there, I noticed the back door was slightly open. That door is always locked, and I know I hadn't touched it all night. My stomach dropped. Someone had to have been messing with it. I shut the door, locked it again, and went straight back to the counter. By then, my hands were shaking. I didn't even know who I should call. The manager? The police? I didn't want to look like I couldn't handle a simple night shift, but I also didn't want to end up on the news as a cautionary tale. Just as I was about to pick up the phone, I heard it. A soft tapping on the front glass. My head shot up, and there he was. The man in the hoodie was standing right outside, leaning close to the glass with his head tilted. He wasn't trying to come in. He was just watching me. I tried to yell at him to leave, but my voice caught in my throat. The way he looked at me, it wasn't anger or desperation. It was like he was studying me, trying to figure out how I'd react. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he stepped back, turned around, and walked toward the pumps. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I wasn't taking any more chances. While I was on the line with the operator, I kept watching him through the window. He walked to the same pump his car was parked at earlier, but the car was gone. I hadn't even noticed it leaving. The police said they'd send someone out, but it might take a while since the station is so remote. I stayed on the phone, giving the operator updates while keeping an eye on the cameras. But after a few minutes, the man disappeared again. 1 second he was there, and the next, he was just gone. When the cops finally arrived, they searched the entire property but didn't find anyone. They checked the cameras, and here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. The footage didn't show him leaving. One moment he was standing by the pump, and then he was just gone, like he'd never been there at all. They told me it was probably just some drifter messing with me, but I'm not so sure. The way he moved, the way he watched, it didn't feel random. I still work there sometimes, but I never take the night shift anymore. It's just not worth the sleepless nights and the lingering feeling that he might come back. Whoever, or whatever, that man was, I'll never forget the way he looked at me, like I was the one who didn't belong. Working the night shift at a gas station isn't glamorous, but it's usually pretty boring. Just me, a couple of coffee refills, and the occasional trucker stopping for gas. I don't mind the solitude, though. It's kind of peaceful, or at least it was. This happened about 6 months ago. It was a Tuesday night, and the station was dead quiet. We're out on a stretch of highway that barely sees any traffic after dark. There's just the station, surrounded by woods on all sides, and a single streetlight, casting a weak yellow glow over the pumps. Around midnight, I went outside to take a smoke break. It was freezing out, and the mist from my breath mixed with the smoke. I was leaning against the wall when I noticed something odd. Pump 6, the one farthest from the store, was making this soft, mechanical clicking noise, like someone had just used it, but there wasn't a car in sight. I walked over to check it out, thinking maybe there was an issue with the pump. When I got closer, I saw the nozzle was out of the holder, hanging loosely like someone had been in the middle of pumping gas and just stopped. That wasn't the weirdest part, though. The digital display was stuck mid-transaction. $13.06. I know for a fact no one had been at that pump all night. It's the one people avoid because it's a little farther from the lights. I thought maybe the last person who used it didn't finish their transaction, but that didn't make sense. I'd been on shift since 6 p.m., and I would have noticed it when I did my rounds earlier. I put the nozzle back and cleared the display, figuring it was just a glitch. But as I started to walk away, I felt this unease, like someone was watching me. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. Just the pumps and the empty highway beyond. I shrugged it off and went back inside. A couple of hours passed and nothing else happened. But then, around 3 a.m., The lights at pump 6 started flickering. At first, I thought it was just a power issue. This place isn't exactly state-of-the-art, and stuff like that happens sometimes. Still, I couldn't help but feel a little on edge. The way those lights flickered, it felt deliberate, like someone was trying to get my attention. I tried to ignore it, but the flickering didn't stop. It went on for about 5 minutes, and then it just stopped. Everything went quiet again. I was about to get up and check it out when the bell over the door chimed.
I nearly jumped out of my skin.
I looked up, expecting to see someone walk in, but the door was still closed. No one was there. The bell had rung by itself. My heart was racing, but I told myself it was probably just a draft. Maybe the wind had nudged the door enough to set it off. I went to lock the door, just in case, and that's when I saw it. There was a figure standing out by pump 6. It was hard to make out in the dim light, but they were tall, with long, wiry limbs. They weren't moving, just standing there, perfectly still, facing the store. I couldn't see their face, but something about their silhouette made my skin crawl. I debated whether to call the police, but I didn't want to overreact. For all I knew, it was just some late-night traveler who needed help. Still, my gut was screaming at me not to go outside. So, I picked up the phone and called out through the glass. "Hey, you need something?" No response. I called out again, louder this time. "The store's closed! If you need gas, the pumps are self-serve." They didn't move, not an inch. I kept watching, half expecting them to bolt or at least react, but they just stood there like they were glued to the spot. The longer I looked, the more I started to notice details, like how their arms seemed too long, almost reaching down to their knees, and their head was slightly tilted, like they were studying me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher asked if the person was trying to break in or if they were threatening me, but all I could say was, "They're just standing there." She promised to send a patrol car and told me to stay inside and lock the doors. I kept my eyes on the figure the whole time, but at some point, without me noticing, they were gone. 1 second they were there, and the next, the space by pump 6 was empty. No footsteps. No sound. Just gone. When the police arrived about 20 minutes later, I felt a rush of relief. I explained what happened, and they searched the area, but they didn't find anyone. One of the officers checked the security footage, and that's when things got even stranger. On the footage, you could see me standing behind the counter, looking out the window. You could see the flickering lights at pump 6. But the figure? It wasn't there. I swore up and down that I'd seen someone, but the officer just gave me this look like I was losing it. They left soon after, telling me to call back if anything else happened. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, when my shift ended, I went out to check pump 6 one last time. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Scratched into the side of the pump, just beneath the nozzle, were 2 words. Still here. I quit the job a week later. To this day, I don't know who or what I saw that night, but I'll never forget the way it made me feel. Like I wasn't just being watched, but marked. I don't talk about this often. It's one of those things that sticks with you, playing over and over in your head, no matter how much time passes. I guess it feels like telling the story somehow makes it more real. But here it is. It happened about a year ago. I work as a rideshare driver. The hours are flexible, and the money's decent if you don't mind driving late at night. That's when the most fares pop up anyway. Usually it's drunk people needing a ride home, couples heading back from dinner, or students too cheap to pay for parking downtown. That night was different. I picked up the ride request around 11:30 p.m. The name on the app was Allison, and the pickup spot was outside a bar on the edge of town. It wasn't a particularly busy night, and the area was quiet when I pulled up. The only person standing there was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She looked nervous, kept glancing over her shoulder like she expected someone to be following her. I rolled down the passenger window and called out, "Allison?" She nodded quickly and climbed into the back seat. "Thanks for coming so fast," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No problem," I replied. "Where to?" She rattled off an address in a residential area about 15 minutes away. I noticed she didn't put it in the app, which was unusual, but I figured she was just in a hurry and didn't want to deal with the hassle. As we pulled away, I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was fidgeting with her hands, her eyes darting around like she was checking to make sure no one was following us. "You okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Rough night?" She hesitated, then said, "Yeah, just glad to be out of there." I didn't push it. Some passengers don't want to talk, and that's fine. But something about her demeanor put me on edge. She wasn't drunk, not slurring her words or anything like that. If anything, she seemed hyper-aware, like her brain was going a mile a minute. About 5 minutes into the drive, I noticed a car behind us. A dark SUV. At first, I didn't think much of it, but after a few turns, it was still there, matching my every move. The roads were pretty empty, so it stood out. I glanced at the rearview mirror again and noticed Allison watching the SUV too. Her face had gone pale. "Do you know that car?" I asked. Her eyes met mine in the mirror, and she shook her head quickly. But the way she said, "No," didn't convince me. It was too fast, too forced. I decided to test it. At the next intersection, I took a turn I didn't need to take, one that veered off our route. The SUV followed. My stomach tightened. I turned again, and so did they. Now I was sure. "Allison," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "If there's something I should know, now's the time to tell me." She hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the seat. I don't know," she stammered. I think they were at the bar earlier." That's when it clicked. She wasn't nervous because she'd had a bad night. She was nervous because someone was after her. I didn't say anything else. I just kept driving, my mind racing to figure out what to do. I couldn't take her to her destination, not if this SUV was following us. And I didn't want to pull over somewhere isolated. My only option was to head for the nearest police station. I was about to suggest it when Allison spoke again. "Can you take me to my friend's place instead?" she asked. "It's not far from here." Her voice sounded shaky, and I could tell she was trying to hide how scared she was. I glanced at the app and realized she hadn't entered her original destination. Technically, I had no proof of where she'd asked me to go. If anything happened, I wouldn't even have her address. "No," I said firmly. "We're going to the police." Her head snapped up. "No! You don't understand! They can't help me! Just take me to my friend's house, please!" I hesitated, torn between wanting to help her and trusting my gut. Something wasn't adding up. But before I could respond, the SUV suddenly sped up and swerved around us, cutting me off. I slammed on the brakes, and Allison screamed. The SUV came to a stop in the middle of the road, blocking our path. "What the hell?" I muttered, my hands gripping the wheel. Before I could react, two men got out of the SUV. One stayed by their car, and the other started walking toward us. Allison's breathing became frantic. "Drive," she whispered. "Please, just go." I threw the car into reverse and backed up as fast as I could, spinning the wheel to turn us around. The man broke into a sprint, but I managed to pull away before he could reach us. My heart was pounding, and I didn't dare look back to see if they were following. "Allison, what is going on?" I demanded. She was crying now, her hands shaking. I don't know who they are," she said. "They've been following me all night. I don't know what they want." Her panic felt real, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling me everything. Either way, I knew we had to get somewhere safe. I spotted the glow of a gas station up ahead, a well-lit spot with security cameras and potential witnesses. I pulled into the lot and parked right in front of the store, where the cashier could see us. "We're going inside," I said. "Let's go." She hesitated, but when I opened my door, she followed. The cashier gave us a weird look as we walked in, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be somewhere public, somewhere those men couldn't do anything without being seen. I called the police and told them everything. They arrived about 10 minutes later, but by then, the SUV was long gone. The officers took our statements and asked Allison a lot of questions. I stayed nearby, listening as she told them she didn't know why the men were after her, that she'd never seen them before. But here's the part that still haunts me. When they ran her name, they couldn't find anyone by that name matching her description. No ID, no record, nothing. The Allison in my car didn't seem to exist. The police escorted her to their car, saying they'd take her to the station until they could figure things out. She looked at me one last time before they drove off, her face pale and scared. I didn't sleep that night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, I checked the app to see if the ride was still logged. It wasn't. There was no record of the trip, no sign that Allison had ever booked the ride. It was like she'd vanished, just like the men in the SUV. I stopped driving nights after that. To this day, I still wonder who she really was, and what would have happened if I hadn't stopped at that gas station.